Welcome to Striking Gold, the show about the Mother Lode League. I'm Levi Flores, he's Jeremy Hurtado, and this week in the MLL we actually had one game that after we recorded last week didn't get played, so that was kind of an issue. That was Esparto at Amador, but all the other teams played and we had some fun games, so we'll go right into it, starting with Argonaut at Wheatland.
Yeah, I mean, Argonaut came out, Wheatland, not really the way I expected it to play. I thought it was going to be a close game. Ends up, Wheatland came out and pretty much dominated from start to finish. Unfortunately for Argonaut, I thought they were going to ride the momentum from the week before's victory against Livingston. Instead, not necessarily the case. Wheatland came out and jumped on them early, and it was pretty much over by halftime.
And when we looked last week, we looked at the Max Preps rankings, in which sometimes they're a little bit trustworthy and sometimes they're not. And in this case, definitely not trustworthy because they were only about one spot apart, going from the section to the state to everything. And Wheatland just definitely had the upper hand. There was no scores in quarter number one. Second quarter, they come out, they split, they go touchdown, touchdown. But then after that, before it got to the half, two more unanswered touchdowns from Wheatland. And then Caden Glover had 17 carries for 171 yards from Wheatland, so averaging 10 yards per carry throughout the game.
Yeah, and it was a neutral site game, even though it was held in Yuba City, which is basically, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes away from Wheatland. So it's pretty much a Wheatland home game, even though it wasn't. And I mean, maybe that had some effect on Argonaut traveling all the way up there to 2.5 hours. Not sure, but regardless, it just didn't work out well for Argonaut last week. And then they get a bye this week, so that kind of helps rejuvenate things before they come back in and start league.
And Argonaut's not the only team that has a bye this week. Somerville also having a bye. Only 3 MLL games will be played this week. But then Argonaut also, their only score was a 40-yard rushing touchdown. So they showed a little bit of promise, although Wheatland definitely had the upper hand, winning the game 42-6. And now when we looked at our predictions, we had very close scores, very similar scores, but you had Argonaut winning the game. So unfortunately, you're not going to be eligible for points. But for me, I had Wheatland 28-20. Argonaut didn't show up the way I thought they would, but I still get 2 points because of guessing it right and being closer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now moving on to Calaveras at Ripon, in which last week I said that this would be the best game Calaveras plays throughout their game so far. And it truly was. They still lost, but they held a TVL team to just a couple of touchdowns, and they showed up for most of the game too. No,
absolutely. This is one of those games we were texting back and forth, or I was texting back and forth with Guy Dossie from the Calaveras Enterprise, and he was telling me, hey, here's a score, 7-7. I was like, okay. And then it was 14-7 at halftime. Thought, hey, Calaveras might be able to come out here and shock people, but then Ripon kind of took over in the second half, scored twice in the second half, and stretched the lead out. And by all accounts, it was the best game Calaveras has played. I mean, he said, when I talked to him a little bit about it, that the Calaveras played well. They just couldn't get over that hump. And so, Calaveras, I think, trending in the right direction for them, finally. But Ripon came out and did what they had to do and got a win at home.
And this game was great for Calaveras. This upcoming week's going to be even better for them. We'll get to that in a little bit. But Calaveras only allowed 1 touchdown per quarter. And now the way I break this down in the high school games that I watch, most teams will get 2 possessions in a quarter, or maybe 1.5 if you really break it down. So allowing 1 touchdown per quarter, you'd say, hey, about 50% of the time your defense, does enough to make the stop, but then the other times maybe not. So Calaveras defensively, I think, did a really good job. Their 1 touchdown came from a 14-yard rush under a minute left in the first, and thinking, hey, you score early, you can score again. Not the case. It should have been closer, but Calaveras threw an interception at the 2-yard line, and that kind of turned away as well. It could have been, even that 1 touchdown made it so much closer, but they just had a turnover right at the goal line.
No, and like I said, I mean, they went down and played a difficult team on the road against Ripon, and Ripon may not have played their best game, but they did enough to get the win. Calaveras' defense has been, let's say, okay lately. I mean, they haven't been the problem per se, that their offense hasn't been able to smooth the ball and score, which puts your defense in a lot of difficult positions to kind of keep the score manageable. But I just have a feeling that Calaveras is kind of, like I said, starting to trend in the right direction. This week's matchup, I think, favors them pretty much. And so I think that's a way that they can build some momentum before the league starts.
Final score was Ripon 28, Calaveras 7. We both had Ripon winning this game. You were just a tad bit closer, guessing 35-12, which that's a pretty close score, closer than some of the other ones that we had guessed. And I had 42-14. So Jeremy, you're getting 2 points for this. I will get 1. And then moving on to Sonora at Buhack Colony, which a little bit surprising. You had Buhack Colony scoring 6 points, whether it was 2 field goals or a touchdown. But I thought Sonora was just going to completely wipe them out. They've been such a powerhouse of a team for decades, and playing Buhack Colony, who will sometimes have a good set of numbers, but maybe not a good team, I thought Sonora was going to shut them out. Not the case. 42-8 was the final score.
Yeah, and Sonora came out, they scored 28 points in the first half. Kind of started off early, took control, had a couple little turnovers there that gave Buhack some chances, but defense held their own. We were up 35-0 before Buhack scored their lone score. And it's kind of, what we expected. A lot of different Wildcats getting on the scoreboard, a lot of different guys contributing. So, Sonora does what Sonora does. We kind of say that all the time, right? But, 42-8, they did what they had to do. They came out and took care of things, and not a big shock there.
Sonora forced a turnover very early in the game. It was actually the very first play. And then Sonora scored a touchdown on the next play once they got that ball back very deep into Buhack Colony territory. It was all Sonora from there. The fourth quarter drive from Buhack was a 74-yard drive. It's not easy. A lot of teams do it, driving the ball down 75 yards. It'll be methodical. They get a few yards. They get a third down. They convert that, and they just continue to move that, and it takes forever. But Buhack Colony did that against the Sonora Wildcats. If it was the first team, second team, third team defense, doesn't matter. They still drove 74 yards and were able to score. And we mentioned it during our Somerville broadcast, in which the teams try so hard to get shutouts. They never want the opponent to score. They wake up early, they go to bed late just to try to get shutouts. And here, Buhack Colony probably kept the Sonora coaches up a little bit longer just by scoring that touchdown.
Yeah, it's one of those things you shoot for as a defensive coordinator, not giving up any points, not give up easy points. Buhack got those points at the end of the game, so I know that was a little frustration. But like I said, 42-8, you'll take that as a consolation prize anytime, and you move on, and you face a team this week that they got their first win last week. So we'll see how that plays out next Friday night for Sonora.
I guessed 49-0 for this final score, and usually I would be happy with that unless somebody else beats me just by a few points. And Jeremy, 42-6. You're 2 points away from hitting the nail on the head, in which I contemplated getting these notes, maybe giving you an extra point because you were that close.
It wasn't right
but
on.
I think we need to keep it fair and just say, hit it on the head, you get extra points. But 42-6, good job. Right there.
Yeah, Buhack Colony went for 2 there, and then, unfortunately for me, they got it. So, but no, in all fairness, like I said, that was a kind of way we saw things playing out, and it kind of lived up to what we expected. So.
Moving on to the final game of the week, Big Valley Christian at Somerville, in which we were both at. Final score ended up being 42-0. We both thought it would be a little bit bigger.
Yeah, it was actually, I think, 37-0. That's wrong on Max Preps.
Okay, yeah. That's what I thought,
because I had to go back and watch the film this morning and be like, wait, that was 37-0. So
okay, I went
Max
crazy thinking about that.
Max Preps had it wrong.
Okay.
Regardless, 37-0 Somerville. And again, they jumped out with the safety to begin the game. On the first drive, Big Valley had that snap to go over their head. And then that kind of set the tone. Big Valley was one of those teams where they were able to move the football. And every time they got into scoring position or got into Somerville territory, they just have a penalty or some kind of misstep that would push them back, and they would end up just bogging down the drive. And so it's one of those things where I thought Big Valley Christian could have scored a couple times if they just kind of stayed out of their own way. And it was just... Somerville did enough to win. They came out and they played well on offense. Defense obviously got the shutout. Special teams did their thing. Barajas was our player of the game.
Right.
He was, offense, defense, special teams. That's why he got it this week. It just, I don't know. It was a convincing win. It just wasn't like that, hey, little star on it. It was just kind of, they won 37-0. There wasn't really anything. I didn't think that was too spectacular about it.
And I think it was almost designed that way. Not necessarily not winning by X amount, but just they were trying new things. Some of the capabilities we got to see. Multiple quarterbacks got into play through a couple of passes that we haven't seen per se yet as a design play in that realm. So Somerville doing those types of things, they were just trying out different scenarios just in case they need to come up in the future. And I get not using those plays because now it's on film and other teams can see that, but it's one of those plays that Summerville just ran 3 times in the same game, and still the coaches weren't ready for it. They said, hey, you need to stay on your man. Make sure if this happens, just make sure you're on your guy. They still didn't do that. So I think it's one of those plays like Sonora that they can run, and then eventually it's going to be open, and then they can capitalize on it.
Yeah, and then they do a pretty good job there at Summerville of kind of building plays off each other. We call them families of plays, where you have a lot of plays that look the same, and then there's different options on it. And so they've been doing a good job. The first week we saw them, it was kind of basic vanilla stuff. And then they've added every week, okay, look, you see that same motion, you see that same toss play. And then, oh, hey, here's a toss and a screen back to the backside. Or here's that toss motion and here's a counter. So they're doing a good job of just building on that. And you're right. So when a team sees that, they watch the film, they got to go, okay, so it's not only just that toss play, they got this play, this play, this play. So you have to prepare for all that if you're trying to defend the defense. And so they're doing a good job of mixing things up there and showing just enough to keep things difficult for defensive coordinators, but yet you're simple enough for your offense to kind of have the same look, same ideas.
And it may not have been convincing offensively for Summerville, but they did get their first shutout of the season. Big Valley Christian not finding the end zone or the uprights. Big Valley Christian, 155 total yards in the game, which they had some big plays. They moved the ball. They did get a few plays over 15 yards, which was one of my keys to the game for the Summerville defense to stay away from, but they were still able to avoid the end zone.
Yeah, and like I said, part of that was because of Big Valley Christian just not being able to sustain drives. They'd have 3 or 4 positive plays and then go backwards with a penalty or a hold or a bad snap or whatever the situation is. And so that's one of those things that teams learn how to be successful. You got to just keep going. Okay, we got to be at 5 or 6, 7 successful plays in a row as opposed to 1 or 2, and then have a negative play, and that kind of messes up your whole rhythm. I think Big Valley Christian, once they get into their league schedule, they're going to be fine. Now, the kind of interesting scenario there is Big Valley Christian coming to the Mud Low League next year, so it's kind of a preview of that. And then they get another Mud Low League opponent this week. So we get to see how things are going to progress for them.
So the final score for that game, 37-0, like we had mentioned. Jeremy, we both had Summerville. Let's start with that, okay? But I have some news about this one. You had 48-16. I had 56-7. Now, if your Summerville math can do this quick enough, that gives a total points of 64 to you and 63 to me. So by 1 point separation, I was able to guess just that much closer than you and get 2 points and you get 1. But even with that, you have 5 points for the week. I have 6. And so that bumps me up by another point, going 21-19 for the season so far.
That's fair. I think we're going to stay in striking distance there. I think I got this week's games kind of locked down. I got to cover it up again. Never know with you over there kind of checking it out.
And
so I think that's good.
With that too, Amador, that game did not get played, so there's no possible points for that.
Yeah.
Argonaut, you didn't get any points, and I got a point for each one of the games that actually played, but you just guessed the closer score for most of them, and that's why you continue to just kind of edge
away.
right behind.
Yeah, that's right. We'll get there. It's a long season. We don't have to do it in 1 week.
That Esparto-Amador game, too, we both had Amador in favor, and we don't really know what happened for any reason. Esparto just decided that they didn't want to play this week.
Yeah, and on Max Preps, it goes down as a forfeit, so I'm assuming there's some kind of issue with Esparto with just, maybe number of players or whatever the situation is. Officially, Amador gets the win, so they've improved to 3-1, which helps them in this look good, but it doesn't help you come playoff times because it's not a win on a field. So it's one of those things where, okay, they got to win. They're 3-1, but they're really 2-1. So it's just something to look at here coming down the road, and may end up causing Amador some issues come playoff time if they need that extra win and don't have it.
Yeah, and we do have to talk about some of the playoff things, and we'll do that at the end of the show. But there's been a few stories, and the section has changed some rules that may favor some teams in the MLL and definitely not favor some teams. But we'll get to that.
It's going to favor some teams for sure, absolutely, and others, well, they're not going to be too happy about it. But it is what it is. That's the new rule. So
Yeah, we'll get to that at the end, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But right now, we'd like to thank our sponsor for Striking Gold, the Motherlode Landscape Meeting Rooms on Demand. And we have the Sonora Conference Center, in which we are in right now, 4 unique rooms in downtown Sonora. Meeting Rooms on Demand is where you can book to rent it out, and also other meeting room on demand through America. I believe Arizona has one. Concord. I just checked online, but I forgot the names already.
Fresno, Vegas, Concord, Arizona, Sonora, and I think Sacramento. But I'm not sure on the Sacramento one.
Meetingroomsondemand.com is where you can go to book any of these places. Rooms and rates available hourly or daily as well, just so you have some options. But thanks to Meeting Rooms on Demand for sponsoring Striking Gold. And now, also before we move on to this week's games, I'm a Jets fan, New York Jets. Aaron Rodgers, poor Aaron Rodgers, he was supposed to be our quarterback savior, but he got injured, in which most players are arguing that it is the turf field of MetLife Stadium. And now, with the MLL as it stands right now, the 6 teams all have turf field. Next year, it's going to be a little bit different with the addition of new teams. But what do you think about turf versus grass fields?
So as an offensive guy, I love turf. Okay. You don't have to worry about mud. Rain isn't as big of a deal. It's less upkeep for your maintenance people. You don't have to worry about paint and all that kind of stuff and expenses as far as that goes. So I've always been favorable for the turf field. Now, August turf fields aren't fun, okay, especially in certain situations where it gets 112 and it feels like it's about 125 degrees on the turf field, and it's not exactly fun for a coach or a player to be out there in that kind of situation. But I don't know. I mean, I haven't looked at the studies enough to know, is there more injuries versus the turf field, the grass field? Because again, grass field, you can step, slip, and you take up the side, you're going to have those kind of tweaks and things like that to ligaments in the knees, which is mainly the normal situation where that's kind of the problem, is everybody claims, oh, it's a knee injury because of turf. Yeah, it's one of those things I just don't know enough about it, but as far as an offensive coach, I loved it because, again, we threw the football wherever I've been, and I don't mind having a ball that doesn't have mud all over it, and
Yeah.
so, and even in the snow games that we've had a couple times at different places and different levels, the snow doesn't really affect it either too, so I personally don't mind turf fields, but again, I wasn't playing, so it didn't matter to me. I could stand on the sideline and not have to worry about stepping in the mud. So,
And I think there is a big difference between the NFL and high school, which is the upkeep available for the grass fields. Like it's not an issue in high school as it is in NFL, but they can definitely tell the difference. And there's been a few grass fields around the area. Somerville played Waterford, that's a grass field, and you think about the NFL, and they could basically make their grass fields like a golf course.
No, absolutely, and that's, I mean, Somerville. Let's talk about that, right? Before they went to that grass, when I played, we had grass there, and when it just sprinkled, it was a mess. Okay, because we had mostly dirt that was in the middle of the field, and so it was one of those things where at the summertime you look out and you're like, oh look, the grass looks nice, but then after 3 or 4 weeks of practice on it, all of a sudden soccer's on it, us as far as football players, and all of a sudden there's no grass in the middle of the field, and then it starts raining, and you got problems, and so it's just like I said, I don't know as far as the injury situation, but as far as a coach and how everything keeps clean, I love the turf field better than the grass field.
All right. I mean, there's no real answer to this from our perspective, but I do know that some of the NFL players have that as an issue. But maybe the high schoolers also have a different perspective because they continue to play on it.
Yeah, it's a good question. We should ask a couple and have it on one of our segments.
Absolutely, yeah. Now let's head into week 5. Amador, they'll get their first home game finally, at least varsity.
On the blue turf.
On the blue turf, and they will host Mesa Verde, who is 3-0. Amador 3-1 with the forfeit, technically 2-1 without it.
Yeah, and this is going to be a good matchup, I think. Mesa Verde comes in 3-0. They came up an 82-7 win last week versus San Juan, which is, down the street from them there in Citrus Heights. Mesa Verde comes in 167 points scored, 39 points against, so their defense is doing a good job. And I mean, they just have a rushing attack. 505 yards on the ground so far this year, 10 rushing touchdowns, 311 pass yards, and 3 touchdowns. So offensively, I think Mesa Verde, it's going to be a difficult challenge for Amador. That Fred Robinson comes in from Mesa Verde with 205 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. And then Jeremiah Daphne has 159 and 2 touchdowns. So between the two of them, they combine for half the rushing touchdowns. I think it's going to be a difficult task for Amador. Amador likes to throw the football around. The last game they played, they turned the ball over a few times doing that. So it's going to kind of come down, I think, to the athleticism versus Amador versus maybe some of the ground and pound offense of Mesa Verde. And it's going to be, I think, a close game.
You mentioned Mesa Verde's points for, points against, 167 points for, 39 against. But you look at Amador, 114 points for, 74 points against. So there's a little flip-flop where Mesa Verde definitely has an edge. And they've played some teams that they've absolutely crushed and dominated. But they do have a common opponent in the Wildfires of Forest Hill. And now breaking those numbers down, Amador did better offensively and defensively. A 46-20 win, where Mesa Verde had it a lot closer with a 33-24 win. They're very close in the Max Preps rankings, in which we learned last week that literally doesn't matter. But in this common opponent, I think Amador definitely has an edge because they started, that was their very first game, right? So now Mesa Verde just 2 weeks ago played Forest Hill and did, I don't want to say a little bit worse. I didn't see the game, but the score definitely doesn't reflect the same thing that Amador had.
No, absolutely.
And I don't know if this is scoregami, but I know it's for sure a random score. 23-19 Amador is what I have.
Okay, I got 34-28 Amador.
Okay, so a little bit more high scoring.
Yeah, I think both offenses are going to get some points on the boards, but I think Amador, finds a way to score one more time than Mesa Verde, and that becomes the determining factor in that.
I think it could come down to the last drive, whether Amador has 23. It's already 23-19, and Mesa Verde just can't do it, or just one of those games where it is that last drive and the stop makes it 23-19. And the defense points against is the big factor in my scoring.
Yeah, and I kind of took that into factor, but I also looked at who they played. I mean, okay, 82-7 that game. I'm going to toss that out because that doesn't really help me any. So you look at the rest of it, and you're like, okay, like you said, the Forest Hill game, that was the one I kind of looked at. It was okay. That kind of is where I drew my comparison as well. And Amador beat them by a little bit more. Yes, it was the first week of the season. And Amador had a week off last week, so I think that's going to help kind of get things going in the right direction too. So, that's kind of where I gave that touchdown edge to Amador. Now, it could go the other way around for sure, but, we're going to go with Amador because they're the Mother Lode League, and I kind of see them pulling off the 6-point win and ending up 4-1 in non-league play. That's not too bad.
Yeah, especially without playing a game in a while, and then the last 2 years not winning a game at all.
Yeah.
Moving on to their county counterpart, Argonaut Mustangs, no game this week.
Yep, they get a bye week, which after the Wheatland game, probably something that they can go back and look at everything the last 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, and kind of just, okay, what worked, what didn't. I wouldn't be shocked to see them come out and a little bit more rejuvenated to come half the bye week coming up in a couple weeks. So.
I don't have anything to say about Argonaut. I know there's some things to work on, like every other team has to as well.
And coaches will use that. Sometimes you give them a day off here or so whatever, but you're going to end up saying, okay, look, we're going to go back and we have X amount of days before our next game, so we're going to use all these days to kind of move in the right direction to what we need to do and kind of reset things.
Calaveras at Big Valley Christian is the next game, and we just saw Big Valley Christian and Calaveras. We continue to see as part of the MLL. Calaveras 0-4, Big Valley Christian 1-3, so it's going to make for a good matchup. Calaveras just coming off that loss to Ripon, the TVL team, and Big Valley Christian, who will be in the MLL, so this is going to be a good matchup for them. Two low-scoring teams with the potential for big scores, and that's how I'm looking at this.
No, I agree, and I think this is one of the things where both teams are kind of struggling. I think one team's gonna finally get on track, and hopefully, that kind of sets them up for the rest of the year. But yeah, and this is one that could be a high-scoring game. It could be a low-scoring game. It's kind of an interesting, matchup, and it's at Big Valley Christian. So that's kind of another thing. As Calaveras has to go on the road again, how are they going to handle going back to the Valleys for back-to-back weeks? We'll see how that kind of factors into the game as well.
Calaveras, I think, will have their best game this season. I said that last week against Ripon, but this is the new week, so it's going to be even better for them. BVC at home, like you said, which may give a small edge. And I think it's going to be a fun running game this week for him, for both of them.
Yeah, I do too. Like I said, I could see this being either a really high scoring game or, you know, a 14-13 type of scenario. You kind of don't know where this is going to go with these two teams. I'm going to let you pick your score first this week, though.
Yeah, I have the Red Hawks getting their first victory, 34-28.
Okay, and I got it Calaveras 20, Big Valley Christian 8.
Okay, so you are going with that lower score.
I am. I think it's going to be Calaveras' defense has been, like I said, leading their team, and I think they're going to keep Big Valley Christian out of the end zone. I think Big Valley Christian will move the ball up and down the field. I just don't think they're going to be able to punch it in against Calaveras' defense, and so that kind of gives them the edge.
All right. Yeah, either one of those two, very possible. And now moving on to Sonora, back on the road, and they will play Livingston, who Argonaut just played a couple of weeks ago. I don't have a lot to say about this game because I just think Sonora's going to tear them down. It'll be a bloodbath, and the Wildcats are just going to come out walking with their bellies full. But Livingston took a loss to Argonaut 28-21, and then they're coming off a victory from this past week, 40-0 against El Capitan.
They are, and then Livingston had a chance to beat Argonaut 2 weeks ago, so they're really been in some battles. But Livingston, you kind of look at it and you go, okay, they have an offense that's really dynamic on the ground. They've rushed for 797 yards. They've ran for 11 touchdowns. They got 3 running backs at over 185 yards between Hernandez, Casanova, and Duran. Between them, they have 10 touchdowns of the 10 of the 11. So you're like, okay, offensively, it's not an issue. It's what's going on the defensive end. And again, we haven't seen Livingston play, so we don't know exactly how this plays out. But I think that Livingston can cause a few problems on the offensive side for Sonora, but I don't know if they can stop Sonora. I mean, Sonora's offense is potent. And so, yeah, I think that Sonora wins, but I don't think it's just a complete blowout. I think Livingston can score a couple times and keep it close maybe for the first quarter, but then eventually I think Sonora pulls away and takes it pretty evenly. I have Sonora 42, Livingston 12.
Okay, and I have Sonora 48, Livingston 7. I think Sonora allowing that touchdown last week against Buhack Colony, they don't want it to happen again, but Livingston is going to find at least one way because sometimes it just happens. You know, you have like Somerville against Waterford, those 2 touchdowns just kind of happened.
Right.
You know, they were pretty far out from the end zone, and somehow pass over the middle just ended up in the end zone with nobody around. Other situations too. It's just that's what happens. So I think Livingston does find that end zone at least once.
No, I agree. And I think the Livingston, I mean, they've been able to put points on the board, so that hasn't been the problem. I just don't think they're going to be able to stop Sonora in the end. And then so I gave Livingston 2 touchdowns. We'll see. I mean, like I said, I originally had it 48-12, and then I did change it 42-12, and I have it printed here, 42-12, earlier when I was making my predictions. So yeah, I just went with 42-12. I thought that was a good sounding number for Sonora to kind of hang that on and then move on and then get to come home for the first time in a month.
Yeah.
You know, so.
No Somerville game this week, which is kind of a bummer for me at least, but Somerville will be back next week away at Modesto Christian, which I think is going to be a pretty fun game. And the next test for Somerville, I know a lot of the coaches, players, and just around the league think Somerville's going to take down Modesto Christian, but I saw some of their scores, and I think it could be a little bit closer than some people think.
No, I think it will be, but that's a comments for another week.
Yes, well, we'll get to that next week. So now let's go through power rankings first, and then we can get to that section decision. For my power rankings, it still stays the same. There's no changes for me.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure mine stays the same too. It's Sonora, Somerville, Amador stays there because they didn't have a game, and then Argonaut, and then Calaveras. So and that kind of stays the same coming into like week 5, I guess 4 or 5, however you want to look at it in the season. Yeah. So I think we're kind of getting a true identity of some of these teams, and some of these teams are starting to trend in the right direction. Some of them are still having some issues, so it'll be interesting to see how things play out this week.
Like I said, no changes to mine. So a story came out from the section and from the local Union Democrat that the section has made a decision to change a rule that's been in place for, a few decades? And
it's been a while since they changed the playoff format, yeah.
yeah, and essentially what the rule says is whatever division you play in the regular season, that's what you will play in the postseason as long as you make the playoffs. And so one of the things that would happen is you'd win your division or your league, and then you would move up a division. So the one big thing that really affects the MLL is the Sonora Wildcats, in which they are a very large school. They've been known to dominate all the MLL teams and anyone that's a smaller school. So now you take the MLL and add Sonora into that, moving into divisional playoffs.
Yeah, and what it does is they don't force them to move up, so they get to stay down in Division 5 like they should be, okay? And I never really agreed with making a team that wins the division. Oh, you won the division, so you got to go up. I never agreed with that. I didn't think that was right. I'm glad they finally made that adjustment. Yes, it's going to benefit Sonora, but it isn't going to benefit them as much as you would think. I mean, Marysville's another team that had to always bump up into the playoffs, and now they won't as well. They'll stay down. Some other teams had that situation. Sutter, I believe, had to go up, and they're not going to come down, or they'll be staying down. So it's going to give the Division 5 playoffs a different look. It's going to make it a little bit more interesting, I think. The teams that it hurts are obviously some of the smaller schools, the Argonauts and the Somerville. But, I mean, it is what it is. At the end of the day, I think it's a better decision for everybody involved. It may not be a better decision for some of the Little League teams. But, I think it's a step in the right direction overall.
I think they could have waited at least till next year because of the way that the leagues are changing. You implement the new rules as it happens and where they're supposed to be set. But now with this, Sonora last year went to the section title game against Escalon? Yes, and they got there. They were one step away from going into the state playoffs. Somerville went to the section title game against Houston. And then Houston ended up going all the way to the state title game playing Ripon Christian. And now Ripon Christian at the time was D7, but they still did really good up at that level. Next year they're going to be in the TVL, so then next year when they go into state playoffs, it's going to be even harder for them to do anything. But by moving Sonora down, who has pretty much shown us that they can defeat any D6 level team, it's going to be difficult for anyone to just move on from it.
No, it is. And I mean, that's the unfortunate part of it. It's fortunate for the league right now. It's going to be unfortunate coming forward because Sonora still, even when they go to TVL, they're going to be in the same division. So you're still going to have them in the playoffs eventually. But it's kind of similar to the way the playoffs used to be. It used to be you win your league and you get in the playoffs. Okay, and that was kind of it. And then you had to go play the TVL team, and so it was TVL versus MLL all the time in the playoffs. It's probably going to end up being that same way coming forward. Is whoever wins the TVL is going to end up playing whoever is the lower 2-3 or section or whatever it is, 2 or 3 team in the league, and so that's going to be the matchup. And still, like I said, I kind of like it. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out though.
And speaking of the TVL, in that, based on their whole divisional scenarios, almost all the TVL teams are going to have a chance to be section champions.
At least make the playoffs. Yeah, I mean, that's the benefit. So, like I said, we'll see how it plays out. It's going to be interesting to see. I think it's going to help some of the seeding in the upper divisions, the 1, 2, 3. I don't know how the impact's going to filter down into the lower divisions, and so we'll have to give it a couple of years and kind of see how it goes. But overall, I think it could be a positive for the section as a whole.
And one final thing, Sonora right now is at the top of the division, obviously, because they moved down and they were already in the top 10 ranking of the upper division. So Sonora's at number 1, Somerville Rest right now at 7, right behind Colfax. And those are the only 2 MLL teams right now in the top 14.
And Colfax is one of those teams, too, that they have in the past had to kind of be in that bubble situation. Are they up or down? I think it's a positive for them as well. Hey, we get to stay down now. We know that. And nobody, and I guarantee this from a former coaching situation, nobody wants to go to Colfax in the playoffs because it's one of the hardest places to play. They come in there and win a game against Colfax. So, like I said, it's going to be one of those situations where if you have to play Colfax, you're hoping you're playing them at home and not up there. So, shout out to the Falcons up there for having a home field advantage. So.
Well, that does it for this week's episode of Striking Gold, unless you have any last thoughts for us moving into this week's games.
Enjoy your bye weeks if you have a bye, because it's going to be a long season after that, and league starts soon. So.
Yeah. Oh, actually, Somerville, we talked about them playing MC, but they also picked up a game against Millennium. And that'll be the game week 10, right before they face Sonora. And Millennium is a future MLL team for football. So that's another one for Somerville that they don't have to rest another week.
Right, exactly. And so that's good for them. They get to have another game just because of the whole Bret Hart situation, not knowing what's going to happen there. So good for them to get a chance to play another game before that Sonora test that we expect in week 11.
Yeah. All right. Well, for Striking Gold, the mother of the landscape, he's Jeremy Hurtado. I'm Levi Flores. Subscribe to NorCal Sports TV. See ya. You couldn't hit the camera?
I didn't want to hit the camera. I just wanted to throw it next to me.